Staying on the theme then, be it out of genuine ideological adherence or fear of the Kremlin's increasingly ruthless crackdown on dissent, a substantial portion of Russians have wholeheartedly adopted Moscow's rhetoric on the war in Ukraine. Franco-Russian journalists Ksenia Bolchakova and Veronika Dorman spent 3 weeks across the country taking a look at a population essentially nursed on the culture of violence and state propaganda from the youngest age. Their documentary, Russia, un peuple qui marche au pas, was broadcast on French television this past weekend. They join me now on set for Perspective. Thank you both for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
So you both traveled to Russia for 3 weeks to film this documentary. I'm curious to know, did you face any challenges in doing that, especially because you're obviously foreign journalists?
Actually, we didn't. We're kind of discreet. The main goal was not to, drive attention. So we traveled by bus, by train. We didn't sleep in hotels. But I'm not going to tell all the secrets.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, you guys describe a, quote, sick, viscerally violent, even cannibalistic society, youth sacrificed to the government, spirits corrupted. What does this look like concretely for the people that you met?
You mean like right now in Russia, there's a sense that you cannot change anything. You cannot oppose this war. And so the people who stayed there are terrified and know that the price of protest is very, very high, and so they will not go and they will not protest. And there have been little actions of protest in the beginning of the war, but the crackdown was very violent, and the judgments in the last days. And the people who went to jail were judged in a very exemplary manner and got very high sentences. And so we show in our movie Ilya Yashin, who got 8 years, and at the beginning of the war it appeared as a huge sentence. And Karamurza just got 25 years yesterday for pretty much doing the same thing, showing images from Bucha and saying just out loud what the Russian soldiers had done in Ukraine. So just speaking out has become an act of high treason in Russia, and you can be sentenced to a quarter of a century in jail. So people understanding that just decide not to protest, pretty much.
And the main difference, if I can add something, is also that what we saw as pretty shocking during this filming was the fact that kids are also prosecuted now. When we used to work as correspondents in Russia, of course, we saw that the regime was kind of authoritarian and there was already a crackdown on the opposition. But never before we witnessed cases, like police, FSB agents questioning children. And this is for the first time something that we saw, and we interviewed even one of these kids, and that was pretty shocking for us.
A 10-year-old. Yeah,
a 10-year-old, and that means that the regime has a new face, what we call a little bit like the dérive fasciste, because it's actually what it is.
Speaking of that, you talk about the youth army movement, the Yunarmia, which makes up a significant portion of people willing to fight for the Kremlin, children as young as 6 to 18 years old, over 1.2 million members. Concretely, what are they planning for? How are they participating in this cycle of violence?
These kids are not participating actively. They are being prepared mentally and physically to be able to participate in a conflict in the upcoming years. What the Yunarmia does is, of course, train them physically, but mostly explains to them that it's great and amazing to die for your country. So this is the idea they put in the heads of this next generation. And this next generation is going to also admire their fathers, their, older brothers who went to fight in Ukraine. There's like a cult of the war that's being thrown, and it's pretty much everywhere.
But the message also is that these kids are defenders. They're not trained to attack another country. No. They're trained to defend their own country, because all that Russia has only done is defending its own people. So Russia is always, in the propaganda and the official storytelling, Russia is always on the good side and on the side of defense. And so these kids are actually the expression is defenders of the motherland, and that's what they need to to kind of understand since the very young age.
Your film obviously doesn't only talk about youth. We see teachers, poll station workers during elections, all of whom kind of find their own way of propping up the Kremlin without necessarily having direct orders to do so. What motivates them? How is it possible that so many kind of lower-level civil servants are so actively willing to participate in this?
Because the very idea that the citizen can have any influence on the political process in Russia doesn't really exist. So people know that there is this kind of Potemkin democracy, that there is something that's going on, but they don't really decide. They don't believe in the very acts that they participate in. So when there's an election, and they take it very seriously, but it's not really about choosing, because nobody really cares about their opinion. And people have said that there, on the one hand, there's the state and the people who are in power, and on the other hand, on the other side, there's society and the actual people. And they kind of live in parallel worlds. And Russians understand that very well. So, and then it's a way to survive. If your superior, if your principal of your school comes and says, I need your help, because if we don't, if our candidate or the powers candidate doesn't cast enough ballots, we will not have money for next year, or we will not be able to, do a program, whatever. So please help me out on this one. People say, okay, so we're a team and we're going to help you out. And they don't think about, devaluing democracy or ruining the future of the kids that they're supposed to be taking care of. It's, they just follow rules, and they find excuses for themselves, saying, I'm not killing anybody, I'm not really lying, it's not like I'm not doing anything terrible. But because they fundamentally do not believe in the act of having a choice and having a voice.
And there's also, just to add a little important moment, like the last 15 years, what Putin's regime managed to do also is to affiliate most of the school principals, journalists, a lot of civil servants are also members or MPs of the ruling party. So it's also a matter of business. It's in their interest that the party wins. So it's a bit complicated. It's all of these together like creates this Potemkin democracy that is Russia today.
I thought what was also fascinating about your documentary is how the system depends obviously not only on government orders and surveillance, but also on average citizens surveilling each other, obviously evocative of the dark periods of Russian and Soviet history that many of us are obviously aware of. How big of a phenomenon do you think this is since the start of the war in Ukraine, average citizens denouncing average citizens?
We don't know.
We don't have the figures, but it's pretty popular these days.
But there's one of our experts, Andrei Soldatov, told us that because they were monitoring, trying to understand how do people who write things on social media, how do they get denounced? Like, how do the cops get to them, basically? So we were asking, are there like red flags or words or whatever? And he said that they were very much surprised when they started monitoring that mainly when people get in trouble is because they have been denounced from a chat. Like they're chatting with, other parents, and then all of a sudden someone decides that they don't like the conversation, and then they go and denounce them. So it's getting bigger. It's not completely new. It's just taking different forms. But what is new is basically teachers and directors of schools going to the cops and denouncing children, and that part is scary because.
And there's like funny Telegram channels where you can follow like kind of like also absurd situations. For example, I saw yesterday there was a neighbor who left a suitcase, and the suitcase had the colors of the Ukrainian flag, which is blue and yellow. So one of the neighbors writes in the group like, I don't like this suitcase, so please remove it. And like another one writes like, yes, it's the Ukrainian flag, I'm going to call the police. So, and it's like that level of also denunciations, and between neighbors, between teachers and kids, between even sometimes in the same family. And yes, it's echoes a little bit some very dark ages that the Russian people went through by the past.
We only have a little bit of time left, but I do want to ask you, what's your feeling about the near future in Russia after having produced this documentary? Where do you guys see things going?
We're trying not to do any kind of prognosis because it's I would say it would be inaccurate. We don't know yet. It's probably going to be very dark, very difficult, and even if
the war stops tomorrow, basically so much has been destroyed inside Russia since the beginning of the war. So much has been dismantled in freedoms, in institutions, in the press. So many people have fled that the country is in pieces. And so the reality is that I mean, we can't really say how it's going to be, but it's not going to be nice. And we don't know if we can, when we can go back, and all the people, the thousands of people who had to leave, if or and when they will find back their homes. So yeah, the future is grim.
Deconstructing these ideologies that you show in your documentary certainly will take decades. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on the show today. And to all of our French-speaking viewers, do watch their documentary Russie, un peuple qui marche pas on France Television's website whenever you can.